Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories. I'm your host for today, Dr. Death. We tried to get PQ River, but he was playing a gig with his band, so I'm gonna have to fill in. Sit anywhere you like. Don't mind the cobwebs. I know we don't. We've got an extra long show this time in honor of Halloween. Let's get it started with an all-new Dogman story. The werewolf costume that wasn't a costume. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by your old pal, Bigfoot.
I saw Dogman once, and it was on Halloween Day. How do you know it wasn't someone in a costume, I hear you asking? Well, what if I told you that's what I thought it was? And what if I told you that I was 100% positive that this thing demonstrated to me that it could not be a costume? Let me tell you the story. I was riding my bike home along a back road into the hamlet my family lived in, and where my parents still live to this day. It's a lot like the country, but there are stores open late within biking distance, so it's modern and up to date, and it was even back when this story took place, I guess 14 or 15 years ago. There aren't many houses along this road. It's sort of like a two-lane highway, but there are some. There isn't a sidewalk, but there's plenty of grass on both sides to walk on, so people sometimes do. This night was Halloween night, and I was riding home after work to watch horror stories and eat candy with some friends that were coming over to our place. It was sort of a party, but really just a movie watching night that we had planned. Nevertheless, I was really in the mood for it and feeling a bit excited. So, there's this one turn on the road where you have to turn right for a while and also pedal uphill. It's scary to come back the other way because you have to slow down first or else take the hill too fast. Going home uphill, though, can be a hassle maintaining speed. I never used to even try. I would take it slow and just concentrate on making the long right turn. So on that Halloween night, I was making the long, slow uphill turn, and I saw what I thought of as Wile E. Coyote ears popping over the tall weeds uphill on my right. My first thought was that someone was wearing a costume. I imagined in my mind an adult wearing a Wile E. Coyote costume leading a bunch of kids on a trick-or-treat run. I was wondering why they would be coming in this direction since all the houses with candy were behind them. Then I thought, well, maybe they're heading in the same direction as I am. My bicycle basket was loaded down with candy bars for trick-or-treaters, so I decided in my head to catch my breath after this turn and offer the kids some candy before finishing my ride home. The thing is, when I finally got around that corner and around those weeds, I was panting and out of breath as I went through one of the bags, grabbing some candy. I turned my head to talk to the kids, but there were no kids there. There was no man wearing a Wile E. Coyote costume there either. You know what was there? A very real, very annoyed looking 6 or 7 foot tall and probably just as wide, hairy, dog-headed monster. He growled at me and crouched a bit in a threatening way, as though he were going to charge me. I rode that bike like I'd never ridden before. I also cried like a baby like I'd never done before as well. And I mean, all the way home. When I ran into the house, weeping and shouting about a werewolf back at the turn, everyone laughed their butts off at me. I mean, it was Halloween, so everyone knew it had to be a joke, right? What else could it be? Except I was there, and that was no joke. It was too big to be a guy in a costume. I don't know what it was doing there, but a human wouldn't have been doing it. That's all I know. The head was a real animal head. You can't have a mask that curls its lip at you, and no contact lenses are gonna look like those evil eyes looked. This thing was a real biological creature, but also it was in some sense otherworldly. It couldn't have been someone in a costume because it didn't have human legs. It had werewolf legs. This was a monster, plain and simple. This was the Halloween werewolf costume. That wasn't.
Dogman at a Halloween store? Is that for real? Madeline Starr reads this all-new story. Coming up next.
Dogman at the Halloween store, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. Back in the late 90s or early 2000s, my older brother and his friend decided to try opening a Halloween store in New Jersey. They had gotten the idea while in Manhattan one night. There were pop-up Halloween stores there, which we hadn't seen yet where we lived, so they rented a place short-term along some forgotten highway. They asked me if I wanted to help out, and I said yes because I had a crush on my brother's friend and wanted him to notice me. So the front of the place was a window that we put our most expensive costumes up into. So the back opened up into some mud and gravel and a forest that looked like it stretched across to Montana or something. I have no idea where Montana is, so let's just say that forest seemed to stretch on to Pennsylvania. Everything seemed to be running okay until the day I came in, and both of the guys were in a really bad mood. They were convinced that someone had been stealing the merchandise, and they lectured me to keep a sharp eye out for shoplifters. They had no security cameras or anything, so my father volunteered to be their security guard as a favor, and he trained me in what I should be on the lookout for. Dad was a retired cop, so he knew what he was talking about as far as security went. Things were going okay after that, and then one night we were closing up and I saw someone walking out wearing one of our best and most expensive costumes, the full-body werewolf. I called out to Dad and we both ran toward the back door of the building. It had been a warm day and we had the front and back doors open to try to create a breeze. Had someone snuck in through the back and put on a costume, then ran off wearing it? That is what I thought I had seen. When Dad and I got outside, though, what we saw stopped us dead in our tracks. This guy heard us behind him, so instead of running away faster, he stopped and turned to look at us. I could already tell from the strange shape of his legs that this was not our costume, and in fact, this couldn't be any costume at all. A human's legs just don't bend the way this guy's legs were bending, and when I looked up to his face, that wasn't a mask. It was some kind of animal that seemed like a blend between a wolf and a lion, but standing on its hind legs like a man. Its fur was all dark, and its eyes flashed like lightning bugs. It had a long snout like a dog or wolf, but it had a mane of hair around the back of its head like some kind of dark-haired lion. And when it bared its teeth and snarled at us, those teeth were far more like a wildcat's teeth than a dog's. Dad and I backed right up into the store and locked that door. Neither of us knew what to say. We just sort of stood there like idiots, staring at each other. Even when my brother and his friend asked us what was going on, neither of us knew what to say. So the rest of the time we ran the store, we kept that back door shut. And by the next week, the weather had cooled off enough that we didn't need the cross ventilation anyway. I never, ever told anyone except Dad what I saw. And I never asked him what he told my brother. I just know that nobody argued about us wanting to keep the back locked up after that. So I never saw the monster again. But I did see my brother's friend that winter. We went steady straight up till almost the spring. We still talk, even though I'm not sure he talks to my brother anymore. And to this day, I've never told either of them about what I saw. I've never told either of them about the time I saw the Dogman at the Halloween store.
We've got an all-new cryptid story right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Swamp Ape Conundrum, as told to Peter Bernard, read by our old pal, Bigfoot.
This is a story from Louisiana that dates back to my grandfather's time. We lived on a swamp in those days, swampy land in the bayou country. There was a pond in back of the family house back then, large enough to swim in, but nothing swam in it. No fish lived in it, nothing. The water wasn't safe for drinking either. Sometimes they'd see dead things floating in the water, but they never saw anything living in there. The pond was maybe 150 feet across and roughly circular in shape. Nobody really knew how deep it went, but they were pretty certain it was isolated and not connected to any other bodies of water. Now, a recurring problem in those days was the bogmen, or the boogeymen. Bigfoot, essentially. Things like the Fouke monster up in Arkansas, and about that size. Not the giant Sasquatches of the Pacific Northwest, but these could sometimes grow to 6 feet, and they were stronger than a man. They would hang around at night sometimes, looking to steal food, either baked goods left on a window or livestock from the farm. These were constantly plaguing my family, and they would get shot at quite often. Nobody ever thought they had hit one, though, as the creatures moved faster than lightning. So, one night, one of those things got too close to the house on a night when both Grandpa and his daddy were prepared for it and in a mood for a squabble. They let the creature get closer than it should have. Then they took aim and fired. Both of them missed, but immediately began pursuing the creature across their land toward that pond I was telling you about earlier. Seeing that he was in trouble, the bogman dove into the water of the pond and disappeared below the surface. Both Grandpa and his father waited there for the monster to come up, their weapons aimed at the water's surface, ready to fire at any disturbance. After what seemed like 15 minutes, my grandfather suggested that he must have drowned. Maybe the water is poisoned and that did him in. They couldn't see air bubbles coming up, so The creature couldn't possibly still be under the water, at least not alive. His father agreed, and they both turned to head toward home. Nothing could have survived that long under that water. As they entered the trees, heading toward their home, they heard a terrible splashing of water behind them. Grandpa told me he turned around and saw that thing tearing out of the water and running away from them on the other side of the pond. It had been watching them the whole time, just waiting for them to turn away from the water for 1 second so it could make its escape. But if it could see them, why couldn't they see it? And how could it have survived so long without allowing one single air bubble to reach the surface of the pond? The entire thing was beyond my family's ability to explain. And so that's why everyone who has dealt with the bog people knows that they are not just animals. And they are not just people. There's something else entirely. What else? I just don't know. And that is the Swamp Ape Conundrum.
October Dogman Behind the Baseball Field. As told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I once saw something that might have been the Dogman. It was back in college in the 1980s in Michigan. I was asked out by this college baseball player who was playing some big playoff that night. He invited me to the game, then dinner afterward. I at first accepted, then canceled, claiming I was sick, when I later got asked out by this rich boy. It turned out the rich boy was a creep. I got all dressed up and he just brought me to some lover's lane, ironically behind the baseball field. I was literally looking at the boy I should have been out with that night playing baseball while sitting in the car of this not very nice fellow. So the baseball game was ending and I knew that soon the field lights would go out. I asked the rich boy to drive me home, and when he refused, I got out and resolved to walk the entire way home myself. I took what I hoped was a shortcut through the woods. In my stocking feet, I carried my shoes. Stockings are cheaper to replace than those heels, or my ankles. So I came out onto a path, and I got the sensation I was being watched. I looked all around me in every direction. Then I saw it. Huge wolf eating something. I'm not sure what. Then the wolf stood up, and by that, I mean it stood up on its hind legs, like something out of a werewolf movie, and I could hear it growling. I took off running away from it back toward the baseball field. I remember how terrified I was, and I remember screaming for help. The next thing I knew, some of the ball players ran over to see if I was okay. I told them I was being chased, but I didn't say by what or whom. Of course, the guy I had ditched was there, and I was pretty embarrassed for him to see me all dressed up like that when I told him I was sick. I searched for some excuse, but I didn't need to. He thought I was there to surprise him, so I ended up going to dinner with him anyway, after I stopped home to change my stockings, that is. The end. Candy Store Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. This might be the strangest and most random Dogman story you'll ever hear. It all started with my younger brother, who I'll call Mortimer, just because it bothers him to be called that. Mortimer is a little candy crook, especially around Halloween time. He's also a snitch, a liar, a con artist, and he's only 12 years old. But he's the reason I saw the Dogman. So I have to explain the little thief first. Mortimer had worked out a scam where he got a young man who worked in a nearby store to let him steal baseball cards and candy, telling him he was going to give them to me. Apparently, my brother knew that this guy had a bad crush on me, when I didn't even realize it myself. So this store clerk thought he was getting in good with me, when actually my brother was essentially shoplifting all these items for his own use. I never knew anything about this until one day I got a call from the owner of the candy store that I'd better come collect my brother or else he was going to have the police take him instead. When I got there, I was led out to the yard in the back. The owner was yelling at my brother, who was shouting back. I got them to calm down enough to explain the situation to me. The poor store clerk was shocked to learn that not only did I not collect baseball cards, I never even watched a single baseball game in my life. The owner said he was fired. I still can't believe that poor guy got fired over little old me. So the bunch of us were bickering and adjusting to the realization that it was my brother's reality, and we were all just living in it, when suddenly something happened that shut us right up. A thing from prehistory parted two trees and walked one step out of the woods in the back of the store and into our lives. It was a big, hairy, fuzzy, sheepdog-looking Sasquatch. I mean, it was like a Bigfoot, only much shaggier and with a face like a kind of pug dog, but a pug on steroids, if you know what I mean. Like some kind of saber-toothed giant pug, I guess. It interrupted our conversation, looked at us, as surprised to see us as we were to see it. Then it sort of barked and ran back into the woods. We all stood there, utterly confused. At the end of a long silence, the store owner just went back to talking like nothing had happened. He told me I was still allowed in the store, but Mortimer was banned for life. I told him I understood, and we walked silently home. And that was that. That is the entire story of the Candy Store Dogman.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Hairy Halloween Haunted Houndman Hayride, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Retribution. This story was sent in by one of our viewers. Dear Scary Stories, when I was a young man, I got the brilliant idea of starting a Halloween haunted hayride just outside of my town to raise money for our church. I made the mistake of mentioning this recently to my grandchildren, who are now young adults themselves. Now they want to bring the hayride back. I don't think that's a very good idea. My version of the ride lasted exactly 3 nights. I'll tell you the story why we had to cancel the rest of the shows, the same way I told my own grandchildren. It's a story that involves a creature that I think most likely was what you're all now calling Dogman. My brother had gone east that summer and came back telling me about a haunted house attraction back there that was a lot of fun and would be cheap to put on. He urged me to join in with him on finding a place we could stage our own version. It didn't work out that year. We never found a place to rent in time, but we kept talking about it over the winter, and a friend of the family suggested that it might be easier to do a hayride than a haunted house. He said we could rent a section of land from him. His family had a tiny house on grounds that seemed to stretch forever. We'd create a path through these spooky-looking woods on the edge of his grounds that connected with a state park. I don't want to tell you which park, in case my grandchildren actually go through with their revival. I don't want to ruin their business, although it's not impossible that the Dogman might. Our friend had the ruins of a barn on his property, and we found an old horse-drawn cart inside that was close enough to sturdy that we were able to strengthen it and make it usable. We filled it with hay and rented an old slope-back horse for the month from another neighbor. Next, we recruited friends of ours to play the monsters that jump out and go boo at the people in the ride. We could only get 4 reliable people to help us, so some of them had to play one monster, then change quickly and play another. Since we only had one woman helping us, she had to play all 4 female ghouls. Quite a feat. If we weren't donating all the proceeds to the church, she probably would have gotten double the pay. So, the first night went without a hitch. Everyone heard their cues, which I would shout out when we were approaching their area, and they would come out trying to act scary and walk by the hayride. Sometimes they would act like they were going to reach inside, but not too realistically, as some of our neighbors tend to be armed 24/7. The second night wasn't as good as the first. We all kept messing up here and there. Didn't seem that anyone noticed though, and nobody who paid for the ride complained. The third night, in some ways, was the biggest and best show of all. Just not to me, that's all. Now, there was one part of the show where my friend Chester was supposed to come out with a werewolf mask on and run around growling, then run off. The second night, he didn't hear his cue at first, so this night I remember shouting his cue at the top of my lungs, which was, "Oh no! Is that a full moon in the sky?" But Chester didn't come out. I shouted it a second time. No Chester. I inhaled and prepared to shout the line even louder when one of the women behind me shrieked. I looked in the direction she was looking and saw Chester in full werewolf makeup running toward the hayride. Good old Chester. He didn't let me down. But then I remembered. Chester didn't have an entire werewolf costume. He only had a werewolf mask, which he wore with a lumberjack shirt and gloves on to hide his human-looking hands. We didn't have fancy Halloween stores back in those days, so we had to improvise. I looked more closely at Chester. He was covered head to toe in dark fur, and not wearing any clothing at all. His head didn't look like a Lon Chaney werewolf. It looked more like a real wolf. The costume looked good. I mean, like, good. I was about to tell Chester he should go do makeup in Hollywood when I heard Chester shouting at me to get out of there. But Chester's voice wasn't coming from Chester. I looked around and saw him on the opposite side of the hay cart. He had his mask in his hand and his lumberjack shirt on, and he was climbing on the cart and telling me to get it out of there. I was so confused. If this was Chester, then who was... Then I understood. It was a real werewolf. I would have beat it out of there, but that old horse pretty much only wanted to go one speed. The people in the back were having the time of their lives. The werewolf would growl at them, and they would growl right back at him and laugh. None of them suspected that this was an actual predator standing inches away from them. I desperately tried to get the horse to move, when suddenly the hairy man with the wolf head began racing around the cart, screaming and howling in frustration and fury. Once that old horse got himself a look at that dog-headed monster, he took off for the stable we were keeping him in, and it was all we could do to hold onto the cart until the ride was over. Even though it was only half the length that the hayride was supposed to be, not one single person complained. Chester and I couldn't believe that we got out of there safely, and we also couldn't believe that nobody realized what had just happened. We knew we had to cancel the rest of the shows, and we did so. I forget how many different fake reasons we gave between the two of us, but neither of us said it was called on account of Dogman, believe me. We just made up the first thing that popped into our heads and stayed home the rest of the nights we were supposed to be out there. Sure, lots of people were disappointed, but at least they were safe from the Dogman. Stay tuned, we got a Madeline Starr story coming up next.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman Vs Cat Woman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. In the early 90s, I got a job in an office and my own studio apartment. I was in my early 20s and finally living far from my parents, which allowed me to feel truly independent for the first time. I got invited by a guy I thought was cute to join him at a Halloween party somewhere in New Jersey, and I accepted. I had always been a goody two-shoes, so I looked forward to picking out my first sexy Halloween costume. After a lot of deliberation, I decided to sew my own Catwoman costume. I recreated the crazy-looking fake leather suit she wore in that Michelle Pfeiffer movie. In the film, the costume is supposed to be hand-sewn by Catwoman herself after she goes insane. So it has deliberately visible stitch marks all over, and parts are held together with safety pins. It took a lot of planning to figure out how to get into and out of the thing, but when it was done, I was very proud of my work. I was excited to go out in something so scandalously form-fitting, but glad that since it was a first date, at least I'd be covered up entirely from head to foot. If I had known I would be meeting a dogman that night, I might have chosen a different costume. So the guy came to get me, wearing a suit with a mustache painted on his face. I didn't comprehend his costume until the next day, when he explained that he was Groucho Marx, a film comedian from 100 years ago. I've seen some of his films since then. He was very funny, but at the time I didn't know who he was yet. Anyway, Groucho drove us to the party, which was at a venue alongside a highway in New Jersey. I told this story to friends for years, saying it happened in Bayonne, but I've been looking in that area in Google Maps, and I can't find any place that looks like where we were that night. This was 1992 or 93, so we're talking around 25 years ago, and things change. Maybe it was Bayonne, and maybe not, but it was definitely in New Jersey. I remember there was a parking lot and a big old bar. There were other businesses within sight of the parking lot up and down the highway, but they were all closed down and dark. The entire area seemed to have been cut out of the forest. So there were trees behind the establishment and trees across the two-lane highway. I don't remember streetlights, but there must have been some on the highway, because I can remember it being dark, but still easy to see where you were going. At first we were having fun, but it grew increasingly hot in there, at least to those of us wearing pleather, cat suits, and attached face masks. I made an excuse that I wanted to go outside and smoke a cigarette, and Groucho walked me out to his car where I had left the cigs. He tried to get romantic with me out in the parking lot, but I really needed some air because I had started to feel kind of ill. He took it the wrong way, left his car keys with me, and went back into the party, most likely to try his luck with someone else. It felt too hot in the car, so I locked it up and took a walk behind the bar toward the forest. It felt relaxing to listen to the crickets chirping in the woods. It made me feel normal again. It was amazing how dark it was in the woods, though. I walked right up to the edge of the trees and bushes, and I stared. I saw nothing but kept staring, trying to adjust my vision to the darkness. If nothing else, I was cooling off and feeling better. I probably owed Groucho an apology, even if he was being grouchy. That made me chuckle. Grouchy Groucho. I was about to turn and head back in when I heard a growling sound coming from, well, I almost said coming from behind me, but to be honest, it sounded more like it was coming from above me. I noticed that I was now covered in shadow, and I looked up. I found myself staring upside down at the face of the largest, tallest wolf that could possibly ever exist. I turned around quickly and backed up a few steps off of the parking lot into the forest itself. Now I could see that it wasn't just that the wolf was large, because he was. It was more that this wolf was standing on its hind legs like a bear. I tripped and fell backwards hard, but adrenaline sprang me back up and I moonwalked deeper into the forest to get away from that thing. The more I backed away from it, the brighter its eyes appeared to glow yellow. Now backlit by the neon and other lights on the bar, I could only make out the creature's immense silhouette and its glowing eyes shining out of the darkness. Its growling grew louder and it took a step forward. Unlike a bear, this creature seemed to be used to walking on its hind legs. I thought about running, but its movements were so graceful that I felt certain it could outrun me easily if it wanted to. I took a chance that it didn't want to. I turned and ran anyway. I didn't know where I was going and I could barely see anything. I got stuck on things more than once, not even sure what I was stuck on each time. I doubled back to the parking lot, following the bar's lights and praying the wolf was taking the longer route behind me. Breaking free of the woods into the parking lot, I noticed I was leaving large parts of my costume behind me. I had Groucho's car keys and made a beeline for his vehicle. Getting in and slamming the door behind me, I looked around frantically for the monster who had been chasing me. I spotted him finally back at the edge of the forest. He was glaring at me with those glowing eyes, but he wasn't coming back out into the parking lot. I watched him and he watched me for the better part of another hour before Groucho came out to see why I had been gone so long. I let him in the car and he immediately asked what had happened to my costume. I pointed to the Dogman at the edge of the woods, but noticed he was gone now. Thinking quickly, I told Groucho that some nut job in the forest had grabbed me and ripped my costume. He apologized profusely and drove me home right away. I have to say he was a good guy about the whole thing. He blamed himself because he left me alone in a parking lot in the middle of nowhere. But in his defense, I hadn't thought anyone would be around to bother me. At any rate, the thing I saw was dark and furry and tall. I would say over 6 feet since I had to look up to it, and I would have been around 5'7" that night since I was wearing very high-heeled boots. It had tall, pointed ears, but the main thing I noticed about it was definitely the eyes. I've never seen an animal's eyes that looked like that ever again. It was almost more like a lizard's eyes, maybe. They didn't look like dog or wolf eyes to me, and they glowed like yellow-orange fireflies. I've never seen anything like that since, although I did once see a UFO in the early 2000s on a vacation in Florida, if you ever want to hear about that. And so now you've heard about the story of how Catwoman got away from Dogman.
Trick or treat, Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. My family has lived in the same neighborhood for 5 generations, 6 as soon as my grandson or granddaughter is born this coming winter. I don't want to say where this is, but it took place where we still live, in a quiet town in a somewhat rural area of Pennsylvania. This was back in the 1980s when the town went through a bit of a revival, with McMansions getting built around our area and parts of our downtown getting a facelift. I was dating my future wife, who I'll call Sheila for this as a private joke between her and me. She had agreed to go trick-or-treating with some kids in the neighborhood to watch out for them. It was her and one of the mothers of 1 or 2 of the kids. I went along too, just because I wanted to grab Sheila the split second the trick-or-treating was through and try to make it to the last showing of some new horror movie. So, after a successful run of a few blocks of houses, the 2 women and the kids overruled me and decided to walk up the hill to the new houses and see if they had any trick-or-treat candy to give out. The houses all looked much more lavish than ours, so the reasoning was that they must have better candy up there too. We walked up and up and up. It was exhausting, and I kept checking my watch and estimating how much longer we could go and still make the movie. After a while, I started to think I was seeing something out of the corner of my eye. I kept thinking I saw a giant black mass moving quickly behind the houses to our right. As we passed the next place, I peered down into the driveway, and I saw it. The huge black mass. It was like a shadow or a blur, and it ran from behind the house, leaped over the neighbor's fence, and disappeared from sight, all so quickly that it was gone before I could finish gasping in surprise. My future wife was busy chatting and hadn't noticed, but I was certain that we should get off this hill. This was old-growth forest that they were building this new rich neighborhood out of, and I think that they were encroaching on an area containing wildlife that had never come out to bother anyone before. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew it was mankind's fault that I saw it. I understood at once that we had crossed the line building those mansions on that hill. But more important to me in the moment was the fact that these kids and these women were determined to keep going up the hill for another 4 houses. I had to let the women see what I had seen, but try not to let one of the kids see. If I could alert the other adults to the danger, maybe we could get back down the hill without anyone panicking. Just then, a loud, pitched scream went out from one of the girls who was dressed as a witch. She was pointing toward the backyard, and she was shouting that a giant wolf man had smiled at her, then ran away. The mother was consoling her daughter, telling her that she had just imagined it, but I knew she hadn't. I pulled Sheila aside and I told her I had seen it too, but I wasn't sure it was a wolf like the kid said. I just saw a big black shadow like a man, but too large to be a man. I advised that we stay calm, but get back down this road and out of the woods on the hill. Of course, Sheila argued with me about it. I guess that's why I married her. It was a moot point anyway because that one girl crying had set off the other kids, and now everybody was scared and convinced that a wolf man was trailing us. We headed back down toward our side of town again. As we passed one of the houses, the giant Dogman ran out into the backyard and peered out at us angrily, growling. It looked like a monster from the movies. It literally had glowing eyes, like glowing gold, I guess. It sort of looked like something too good to be in an 80s monster movie, though. Sheila told the kids, who were all crying, that it was just a man in a Halloween costume standing in his backyard. That's all it was. We just have to keep walking and everything will be okay. I think the kids were starting to believe her when the immense 7-foot or taller Dogman snarled and charged out of his backyard, heading straight for us. Needless to say, we all screamed and ran. I grabbed a kid up in my arms and ran with him. It was all downhill from there, and we were soon back in our part of the neighborhood. I have no idea how far that thing chased us. I doubt any of those kids went trick-or-treating up that hill again the following year. I don't remember if we made it to the movie that night or what, but I know that Sheila, to this day, insists that we just saw a costume worn by a rich, eccentric person who was out to scare kids trick-or-treating. She says she's sure that it wasn't a real Dogman. But this thing moved and twitched and growled and drooled just like a real animal. Its ears moved around on top of its head in reaction to its environment. It was not a costume. It was a dark, Doberman-like Dogman, tall as a basketball player or taller. Sheila didn't see this animal thing leap over that fence. It practically flew over. A guy in a costume with light-up eyes wouldn't be able to see well enough to make a leap like that, even if he were some kind of Olympic athlete. Also, the body shape was not human. It was so thin at the waist and so wide at the shoulders, a human body isn't built like that. The way the legs bent was not the way a human's legs bend. I think Sheila is just telling herself it was a costume so that she doesn't really have to think about it. After all, nobody we know has ever seen anything like that in this area since then. We don't really know the families up the hill, though, obviously. So, if what we saw was in fact a Dogman, then I would have to say I think it is a natural animal, but just a very strange one. I know its eyes were odd, but there are other animals in nature with natural biological luminescence. I don't think the eyes automatically mean it's supernatural or from another reality or dimension. On the other hand, we did see it on Halloween. Maybe that wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it really did manifest because of the supposed thinness of the veil between the realities on that night. But if it did, then it would be proof that the other reality is just as real and physical as this one. What I mean is, that animal man was every bit as real as you or me or the person sitting next to you. It was physically there, and we were all terrified of it. And so, to the best of my recollection, that is the entirety of the story of the Trick or Treat Dogman. Berserker Dogman at the Haunted Hayride, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. This story happened way back when I was a crazy teenager. I'm nothing like this anymore. This was years and years ago, back in 2015. There's a Halloween hayride and haunted house in Pennsylvania on Mount Bethel Road. So, one of my buddies put the rest of us up to the idea of sneaking over to the hayride and trying to scare the people who were hired to scare the customers. We thought there would be guys in monster costumes out in the woods or something. We had never actually gone on the ride, so we had no idea. We were just mischievous, not out to hurt anyone. We were boneheads, and this was our dumb idea of fun. Like I said, this is years and years ago. Being dumb guys, we didn't have much of a plan. Basically, we came up behind the back of the property by cutting through this forest land. We had this idea that there would be guys in costumes in those woods, but I think that was not the case at all. At any rate, when we got near the edge of the property, one of us pointed out what at first appeared to be a big guy in a furry costume. I think I was the last to see what he was motioning toward. There was a big, tan, furry facing away from us with a very realistic tail. It really looked like a pit bull tail. One of us made a noise and the furry turned around. Guess what? The front of it looked as much like a pit bull as its tail did. It wasn't a guy in a furry costume. It was a tan-colored, man-sized pit bull standing on its hind legs. I remember I was like, oh, no way, and I was out of there running as fast as I could. If that was some kind of Halloween trick, then they tricked me all right, because as far as I'm concerned, that thing looked real. I heard shouting and screaming behind me, and that thing was chasing all three of my buddies around in this one area, just chasing them around this circle. He would run in one direction, then the other, always almost catching them, but never quite. He was toying with them, tiring them out. It was during those few moments that I got a better look at the creature. This animal's legs were too thick to be dog legs, but they bent backward like an animal. They were thicker than a man's legs, but shaped like a wolf's legs, if that makes any sense. It was taller than my tallest friend, who is 6'2". I would say it was maybe 6'4" when standing up tall. Its arms looked like the arms of a heavyweight boxer, except they ended in dog paws, not hands. The thing displayed its claws menacingly in front of it, but they were not hands like I hear in most Dogman stories. I have to say, in this case, the lack of an opposable thumb did not make it any less terrifying. I could see that my buddies were in a losing battle, and I knew I had to give them a chance to get away. I thought if I threw a rock to distract the Dogman, it would give them a chance to run toward the Halloween hayride and haunted house. If they could make it over to where there were other people, then the Dogman would probably have to back off. I was amazed that this guy was willing to take on 4 young men like us, but I doubted he'd be willing to take on any more than that. It took a while to find a rock big enough that I thought it would do any damage to a creature that large. It needed to be small enough for me to throw, but hard and heavy enough to give the others a chance to escape. Once I found one, I needed to find an angle on the pit bull man. The trouble with that was that this thing was fast. It would stand there, panting, then drop to all fours, circle in one direction, and bark. He'd stand up and watch them run in another direction, then drop to all fours, zip to that spot, and bark them back the other way around. He was hurting my friends. Finally, I just had to take my shot. I felt terrible doing it, as getting hit in the head by this rock might be enough to kill a grown man. I once got clocked with a radar gun throwing a baseball 87 miles per hour. Certainly, if I didn't miss, I would at least hurt this Dogman as well. That's not my nature. I'm a lover, not a fighter. But this was in defense of the lives of my buddies, so I threw that heavy, jagged rock as hard as I could at the back of the head of that monster. And it bounced off like a pebble. The pit bull man gestured at its ear with its front paw as though it were being bothered by a fly. Maybe it thought an acorn had fallen on it or something. That was how ineffectual my fastest fastball was. About the only effect it had was that my 3 buddies saw me, and they called out to me. That, in turn, caused this pit bull man to turn around, and then he saw me too. You know in a cartoon when they show an angry bull and they have it blow smoke out of its nostrils? Well, that was exactly what this was like. The pit bull snorted steam and his eyes lit up like he was insane. He gave out this long bark that sort of almost turned into some kind of wailing scream in the middle of it, like a half animal and half human screech of rage and indignation. By the way, I want to say that when I looked in its eyes, they were furious, but they looked like dog eyes. You know, dark in the middle with white around the edges. They didn't glow or look orange or yellow or red. Well, they were very bloodshot, so they were red in that sense, but this really looked like a cross between a pit bull and a human. It did not look supernatural or anything of that nature. It did, however, look completely insane with a rage like a berserker. The freaked out Dogman put on a show of anger like I'd never seen before. It was utterly pointless. He acted like some kind of roid rage victim or something. He literally bit this small tree and tore it out of the ground by its trunk. He shook his head and the entire tree went flying in a random direction. I noticed my buddies were gone. At least I had accomplished that much. As for myself, I felt pretty sure that I was a goner. This thing had me in its sights, and if I tried to run, it could catch me inside of 2 seconds. I backed slowly into the woods, and it edged, step by step, closer to me. Each step forward brought an enraged gesture of one sort or another. Saliva was flying in all directions as this Dogman barked and growled and bit large branches off of trees just to show me that it could. I felt as though it were getting really cold, and my extremities were going a bit numb. At the time, I wondered if I were being hypnotized or something, but all I know is that I blacked out. Smelling salts woke me up. Some guy had a first aid kit and was waking me up. My buddies had come back for me with Captain First Aid and another guy wearing a top hat or a bowler or some old-fashioned hat, I can't remember. I guess they worked with the haunted house, but I never asked. Maybe they were from somewhere else entirely. I just wanted to get out of there, and 2 of my friends helped me up and got me walking and took me home. The other one, though, the other friend, he actually stayed there and got himself some paying work helping out that night. I think they were short a person or something. Again, my memories are fuzzy because I was kind of in a state of shock. When I passed out, I didn't really expect to ever wake up again. So I stayed a bit whacked out for pretty much the rest of the year. The other guys had been shaken up too, but they went back to joking about life almost immediately afterward. For me, the sight of that thing so filled with hate, who might have killed all of us for no reason at all, it just changed me. That was sort of the first night of my adult life, I guess. I stayed friends with those guys, but I hardly ever hung out with them again after that. Different things are interesting to me now. I have an entirely different view of the whole world, and I don't know if that would be true if I hadn't been shocked into adulthood by the berserker Dogman at the haunted hayride. A UFO with apes in its windows, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. My entire family saw a UFO outside our home when I was a kid in 1968. It was a shocking experience, but we kept it among ourselves since my father had a sensitive job in the aerospace industry and he couldn't afford any public ridicule in his career. Since what we're talking about is an apparent craft that moved through the air, I always wondered if Dad's job had something to do with the visitation, but he never indicated anything of the kind to me, and I never had the nerve to ask him directly. He didn't like to be asked about his work. It could ruin the mood in the house for days if one of us asked him too much about his job. The sighting of the UFO happened like this. My younger sister, who we can call Betty, woke up screaming. She would have been 7 at the time she woke all of us up, shouting about a bright light. In fact, the entire house was lit up, as though all the lights were on, even though none of them actually were. It was not like it was the daytime, as the light that filled every nook and cranny was nothing like sunlight. It was an artificial, very pale white kind of light, not warm like sunlight. It was so bright, it was pervading everything. We all ran into my parents' bedroom, where we found them staring out the window at the apparent cause of the brightness. There was a huge circular craft, like your classic flying saucer, but with round portals lining the side. Imagine a wheel shape, and that we were looking at the bottom of the wheel. It was slowly spinning in space, holding still otherwise. I went closer to the window and could see that there were people in the portholes, or figures at least. I could swear they looked like chimpanzees or apes looking back at us. Was this a zoo ship? We all stood there, holding onto our parents, watching as the wheel slowly turned. Each of the monkeys watched us back through the little circular windows. Then it was gone, and Dad was saying, "Show's over," and Mom was rushing us back to bed. It was over that fast. And I do mean it was there 1 second and gone the next. It might have flown off very quickly, or disappeared, or become invisible, but we were looking at it, and then we weren't looking at it. And then we were being told to go back to sleep. Nobody except me seemed to think anything was weird about any of this. They all went back to sleep quickly while I was up all night and a wreck for a few days afterward. I never have had any strange experiences since then. I've never seen another UFO. I've never seen monsters or aliens or men in black or anything. People ask me if those might have been Bigfoot looking back out of the portholes. I usually answer that I would first need to be certain I understood what a Bigfoot actually was before I could even try to guess if that's what I saw. I don't have any explanation for what we all saw, or why I was the only one who was alarmed by it all. I wonder if somehow the craft was telling us not to be afraid, but the message just somehow didn't get through to my unconscious mind. Besides, my suspicion that this had something to do with my father's job, I haven't had a single guess as to what might explain the UFO with apes in its windows.
Have you heard our secret sheep squash story? If you were a paid subscriber, you would have. I'm about to record a story that our subscribers will hear a full week before any of the rest of you. If you want to help support this channel, just go to peterbernard.com and click on the PayPal donation button. That'll let you in on the weekly extras. See you next time on Scary Stories.
Hey, Scary Storage. I would like to keep myself anonymous, but give you a story that happened to me not too long ago. So, this summer, me and my friends, we were going to the back of our apartment complex. You know where those goes. We were smoking. Normal day, normal everything. While we go back there, when we first arrive, we hear screaming. And we're all looking at each other. It's like, I don't know, it's like an unspoken word to leave, but we don't leave yet because we want to know what made the noise. So as we go to the corner of where the fence is, there's a hole with an opening big enough where you can put your head through. We walk there. We see a man. He's not a normal man. He's has some kind of robe on, and he's running through the woods, shouting something. I can't stress enough how bad he looked. He looked like he was just living in the woods on the road for years. And he was running back and forth to the woods. The woods is pretty dense, but you could like see from our position where he was running to. It looked to us like he was summoning something. As a matter of fact, I have to put everything that I own on there to say that I think he was trying to summon something. And we had been selecting him. There was times where we would get quiet and he would stop, kneel down on the ground, and start yelling something again. It was one of us who made some noise. He would look around, run again, go to a different spot. This happened about 3 or 4 times within a 30-minute period. So we finally left after we were done. We didn't want to stay anymore because we had a bad vibe from it. Skip forward to 3 weeks later. Me and my cousin Josh, we go to the back again. This time we couldn't be where we were because there was some people working us. So he came up with the idea, how about we just hop the fence and go over the woods. Me not thinking of none of that a couple of weeks ago, thinking he was some kind of crackhead or something. I said, alright, fine. Especially because I had a hatchet on me, which I kept in my jacket. So we hopped over the fence. We went past the trees. What a lot of people don't know is past those trees, it's a lake down there.
Well, we hope you've had a good time. Follow the instructions on the exit signs, and we'll see you next time on Scary Stories.
In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors, such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdigi and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description.
Have you heard our secret sheep squash story? If you were a paid subscriber, you would have. I'm about to record a story that our subscribers will hear a full week before any of the rest of you. If you want to help support this channel, just go to peterbernard.com and click on the PayPal donation button. That'll let you in on the weekly extras. See you next time on Scary Stories.
OMG, it's a like insect from space. I'll call him Them. Aww. Them, you've become so large. OMG, Them, don't eat that cow. He ate it. Don't go, Them. I love you. In colors. Oops, I mean not in colors.
I was curious when the next Northeast Comic-Con is and who's going to be appearing there. Boy, was I surprised when I checked their website and found out it says I'm going to be there. And it's Thanksgiving weekend. I did my due diligence as a fake news journalist and discovered that yes, in fact, they are offering to pay for me to go out and appear as myself, braving the traffic to and from Boston on one of the craziest weekends of the year. So I guess if you live in Massachusetts and you're bored of Tofurkey after Thanksgiving, then come on down and say hi to Futurama's own Billy West, Godzilla's co-star Akira Takarada, and other luminaries who I assume must live near Boston. Sounds like fun. See you there.
Left My Tiny House. Scary Stories by Peter Bernard, Volume 1. Now available on Amazon in paperback.
Come back for more scary stories.